We have over 300 leaders and champions focused on addressing the needs of our college students across the country here today. So thank you for joining us. And thank you so much, Bryce, to you and the policy and advocacy team at the Hope Center, and to Lauren Bond, who is leading our strategic marketing and communications team at the Hope Center, for putting our first ever policy summit together. We're very excited to see everyone here today. So excited to hear from our keynotes and all the different sessions that we will be seeing at the Hope Center Policy Summit today. We are really passionate at the Hope Center, really focusing and centering students and centering their basic needs. The conversations in the policy world about student basic needs should not happen in the margins. They really should be a focal point. And the folks that are being highlighted today, including our keynotes, have really championed this and have been a great example to lead the work. So I'm really excited to introduce this morning's keynote speaker, Secretary of Higher Education from New Jersey, Brian Bridges. A little bit about Secretary Bridges, who is keynoting this morning's session. He's part of Governor Phil Murphy's administration. Secretary Bridges is responsible for policy development and coordination of higher education activities for the state, and he's coordinating initiatives to improve college affordability in New Jersey. Secretary Bridges previously also served as the Vice President of Research and Member Engagement at UNCF, where he led the Frederick D. Patterson Research Institute and the Institute for Capacity Building. Secretary Bridges also led UNCF's Career Pathways Initiative to improve job placement outcomes at historically Black colleges and universities and predominantly Black institutions. He also served in various leadership roles, like being the Vice Provost for Diversity, Access, and Equity at Ohio University, and the Associate Director of the Center for Advancement for Racial and Ethnic Equity at the American Council on Education, and also serving as the Associate Director at the National Survey of Student Engagement. Secretary Bridges is a former assistant professor of higher education administration at the George Washington University. And he also earned his doctorate in higher education administration from Indiana University of Bloomington, a master's of public administration degree from the University of North Carolina, Charlotte, and a Bachelor of Arts in English Language and Literature from Francis Marion University. Secretary Bridges, I'm just so excited to have you here this morning and hear from you about all the great work you're doing in New Jersey. Welcome to Hope Center's first ever policy summit. We're very excited. To you, sir.
Well, thank you, Atif, for that very warm welcome. I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you this morning. I don't know if we were at GW at the same time, but it's interesting how paths in education and higher education often cross that way. First, I want to thank the Hope Center for the opportunity to join you and Undersecretary of Education Kaval this morning in discussing the critical issue of how to best support students as they seek high quality and life-changing credentials. And it is with great pride that I share with you all today some of the innovative, I believe they're innovative, higher education achievements that we've accomplished in New Jersey under Governor Murphy's leadership as we continue to strive toward the state's attainment goal of 65% of working age residents with a high quality credential by 2025. My vision for higher education in the Garden State is to accelerate upward mobility for all New Jerseyans, especially for those who've been historically underserved, through equitable pathways to post-secondary and career success. We all know that the higher education landscape looks very different than it did just 3 years ago, as do pretty much most landscapes. However, the resilience of our students has been unwavering, and we want to meet those resilient students halfway. Many of them are excelling in spite of the profound obstacles before them. And we know that COVID-19 has deepened racial equity gaps that already existed prior in pursuing and persisting in higher education to degree completion. Basic needs for many families are more difficult to secure than ever before, but they're also more necessary than ever as our society attempts to navigate into some sort of new normal. We know that too many of our students bring more baggage to campus than just their book bags. They often carry psychological baggage that is weighed down by the familial, financial, societal, and other external struggles that students often face that impact their ability to succeed. And unfortunately, food insecurity is sometimes in that additional baggage. One New Jersey administrator shared with me that they worked with a graduate student couple who worked on a farm baling hay for $100 a week to afford food because their scholarship was just enough to pay for their education. Another student on one of our campuses called their family while utilizing the food pantry to ask what they could bring home over the break to help feed the rest of the family. These stories, regrettably, are not uncommon across many of our nation's campuses. And they are the very reason why New Jersey leveraged federal and state funds to address barriers and impediments that students have to overcome to pursue and acquire the education they want and so rightfully deserve. This morning, I want to talk a little bit about how New Jersey has worked to leverage both federal and state resources and put policies and programs in place to help meet these student needs and facilitate their post-secondary and life success. This journey began with the creation of our state plan for education, which established a foundation for this work and other state higher education efforts over the last 3 years. Where opportunity meets innovation, the title of our state plan places students at the center of our endeavors with an equity orientation and was designed to make certain that all New Jersey residents, regardless of life circumstances, could pursue the credentials and degrees they need to succeed in life and fully participate in our economy. To do that, the state would have to make efforts to remove as many barriers as possible, financial and otherwise. So we dedicated $28.5 million of the second round of the state's Governor's Emergency Education Relief Fund, or GEAR, as many of us know it, to establish our Opportunity Meets Innovation Challenge grants so campuses could implement vetted best practices that increase college completion. Given that barriers to student success are multifaceted, interconnected, and require sustainable solutions, this funding helped institutions develop system-wide reforms that could pave the way for long-term progress in achieving our goals, such as a multi-intervention system of student supports to re-engage formerly enrolled students. New Jersey utilized this critical federal funding to prioritize students' needs to ensure that our workforce will be ready to meet the challenges of the post-pandemic economy. 35 institutions received funding to implement system-wide reforms, focusing on students who are historically disadvantaged, including underrepresented minorities, low-income students, and working-age adults, populations that we know were hardest hit by the pandemic. Institutions chose from a series of interventions reflecting the 5 core priority areas of the State Plan for Higher Education. And in New Jersey, we know that student success requires a comprehensive approach beyond solely ensuring that students are adequately prepared to take on college-level coursework. Access alone is not enough. We have to also provide them with affordable pathways, ensure that they have ample supports throughout their process, and foster a sense of belonging while they're enrolled. Each of these components is critical and interconnected to ensure student success. But even before we implemented the OMIC grants, we asked ourselves, how can some students succeed when they're constantly experiencing barriers that include food and housing insecurities and overwhelming childcare costs, for instance? As part of Governor Murphy's whole of government approach and our proximity to the student experience, it is our responsibility as a state agency to acknowledge and address these challenges. But before I talk about how we address food insecurity challenges, I'd like to reinforce something that everyone on this call knows, that when students struggle with food and housing insecurity in particular, their focus shifts to survival rather than academic performance, completing their degree, engaging with peers, or managing their health. And none of our students, especially those most vulnerable, should go hungry or skip a meal, yet we know that this is a reality for many even prior to COVID, which only exacerbated these concerns. In February 2020, just weeks before New Jersey confirmed its first COVID-19 case, we joined our colleagues here at the Hope Center in releasing the findings of a survey conducted among New Jersey community college students. More than 9,000 students responded, and listen to this, almost 40% of them were food insecure in the prior 30 days, 44% were housing insecure, and 14% of them had been homeless in the previous year. And this was before COVID in New Jersey, a state with one of the highest per capita incomes in the nation. Among those students experiencing basic needs insecurity, 70% reported being unable to afford childcare, illustrating how basic needs insecurities are often compounded. To add to these results, a fall 21 survey by our office across all New Jersey institutions with over 15,000 respondents revealed that 70% of them were feeling more stressed and impacted than in 2020 when the pandemic first hit. These jarring findings across two surveys conducted over a year and a half apart demonstrate the pandemic's disparate effects on New Jersey's marginalized communities. Opportunities exist for states and their colleges and universities to ensure that every student is equitably supported, and one of those opportunities in New Jersey include the Hunger-Free Campus Grant Program. Back in February 2021, I joined Governor Murphy to announce the use of more than $1 million in federal funding to support the goals of the New Jersey Hunger-Free Campus Act, which was signed by the governor in 2019. Institutions are using funding to address student hunger in diverse ways, including, but not limited to, launching food recovery programs to connect students to access food from campus events, hosting community food distribution events, and scaling up food pantries to include fresh produce and freezer items, among other initiatives. This year, New Jersey has doubled down on this initiative and made an appropriation to not only sustain the funding, but to expand it and provide grants to the independent sector, illustrating New Jersey's commitment to combating food insecurity wherever it might exist. We know that students are not solely food and housing insecure at public institutions only or at four-year institutions only, and this is why we wanted to expand this program to reach more students and better serve New Jersey residents. These examples of leveraging federal dollars and sustaining some of that commitment with state dollars is not the totality of our efforts. The second thrust of our two-pronged approach to addressing students' basic needs and securities was to leverage actionable and evidence-based practices that can help build higher quality credential pathways. We again worked with our good partners at the Hope Center to develop a playbook and website that provides technical assistance to institutions on providing support for students' basic needs, guidance on partnering with community-based organizations, and a directory of statewide resources spanning multiple categories of basic needs. Both the playbook and website were informed by student focus groups and a convening with institutional representatives to identify challenges to and promising practices for increasing student support, utilization, and access. This playbook provides learners, leaders, administrators, faculty, and staff at New Jersey colleges and universities with actionable information, evidence-based promising practices, and scalable resource solutions to effectively and sustainably help students secure their basic needs, including not solely just food and housing and shelter, but also childcare and transportation. Now, as illustrated in our student survey findings mentioned earlier, we also understand that the pandemic has taken a mental toll on our students. In my conversations, I get a chance to travel around the state and get to meet with students occasionally. And I was on a couple of campuses just last week and heard the stories from students. And this continues to resonate this fall as well, even as they go back to some sort of normal, that their mental health concerns continue to be through the roof. And the way New Jersey is trying to address that is dedicating one-time funding from the American Rescue Plan Act to the Office of the Secretary of Higher Education for a mental health initiative. The funding, totaling $26 million, is to help address the mental health needs of students at New Jersey institutions and will provide support by creating a telehealth initiative, awarding institutional provider grants to partner with local, state, and national organizations, as well as providing professional development with a focus on multicultural sensitivities. The State Department of Human Services also received $2.4 million in ARP funding to enhance higher education peer counseling. These funds are part of the governor's overall $55 million investment in mental health initiatives that are designed to support students and youth and their campus communities as they slowly move back to their new normal. Throughout all of this work, we continue to collaborate with our sister agencies to develop a cohesive and long-term approach to best utilize all the available resources and braid services to support our state students. A major tenet of all these initiatives is sustainability, which will require partnering with our institutions to amplify sustainable solutions, utilize best practices while pursuing innovation, and provide long-lasting benefits to our students. Through federal funding, coupled with New Jersey's historic public investments in higher education during the Murphy administration, we remain committed to ensuring that students have equitable, affordable access to post-secondary education, not only now, but also into the future, while simultaneously addressing the barriers to accomplishing their goals. One of the commitments made in the state plan for higher education is ensuring that all students have the opportunity to obtain a high quality and life-changing credential. This is why I do this work. I know that this is why you do this work, and we as a society are all the better for it. In closing, I want to thank the Hope Center for College, Community, and Justice for their continued partnership and steadfast dedication to advancing this work nationwide, and I hope each of you enjoys today's summit. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. That was really inspiring and refreshing, and it's just great to see all the work you all are doing in New Jersey to really focus on students' needs and really centering them. I have a few follow-up questions, if that's all right.
Sure.
So one of the things, when we talk about, values, and if people are really, not only talking the talk, but really taking actions and so forth, we ask to see their budgets. And clearly, in New Jersey, there have been significant investments. One of the things that you talked about is utilizing the findings like a Hope Center survey to be really prepared to hone in and do some targeted funds that were given to institutions of higher education. You talked about $28.5 million GEAR funds investment, which is governor's discretionary funds. And that's a lot of money because having served in the previous position, I know that that's a significant amount compared to what other states have done. So kudos to you. In order to do that, you obviously had to have been well positioned, and other initiatives that you have done and other investments you have made. My question for you, Mr. Secretary, is that what was the driving force in taking this whole systems approach? Was it based on a previous legislation or a policy or other priorities at your office or the governor's office? Because other states can really learn from this, from what you all did, because we were really well positioned. The pandemic hit us. Nobody was expecting it, but some states did a really phenomenal job in positioning themselves and really allocating funding in a seamless, timely fashion, like New Jersey. If we can talk about that, what was this prior driving force that you were really well positioned to execute?
Sure. Well, thank you for that question. And honestly, if I had to say one single driving force, it was really the passion of a very progressive governor who wanted to make sure that we put structures, policies, regulations, everything that we could in place in order to meet the needs of the students who, and not just students, but all state residents who had been marginalized and too often left behind in the past. So we began that early in his administration by establishing the State Plan for Higher Education, which was the first in quite some time in New Jersey. And throughout the state plan, there was woven this idea of meeting students where they are, especially those who are the most vulnerable. Equity ran throughout everything. Students were centered, and even the 5 areas of the state plan, which are the 5 core areas of the state plan, which are expanding opportunities for students to gain early college exposure, was all about really making sure that the students who have often been left behind and couldn't take advantage of dual enrollment and AP courses and the like were able to gain early college exposure. Improving college affordability was the second one. And we've been doing that through our College Promise program. Fostering student success writ large across the board was a common theme to make sure that students were at the center and that all of our work was making sure that regardless of what we did, drove student success first and foremost. Promoting safe and inclusive learning environments. Because it wasn't just enough to open the doors through affordability and access to get them to campus. How are we making sure that the campuses are safe and inclusive to cultivate the learning of all those students who might not have been part of the traditional higher education experience in the past? And cultivating research, innovation, and talent. So really, the governor provided the vision, and my predecessor, who many of the people on the line know, Dr. Zakiya Smith-Ellis, worked to get this state plan implemented. And the elements of the state plan really drove all of this in everything that we did through Zakiya's administration and now mine.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. That was great. You also talked about a $55 million investment in mental health initiative and really focusing on students in higher education. Again, that's a significant investment that also required, and you talked about DHS as well in another initiative. And we talked about whole systems and whole government approach. In your experience, really breaking down the silos can be challenging, of course, but in your experience in New Jersey, what are things that are really working well to take this whole systems, whole government approach, as multiple agencies and multiple secretaries have to talk to each other? What are some of the things that you've seen that really are working well in New Jersey that other states can learn from?
Great question. I think that we've been fortunate in that the governor has cultivated collaboration, interagency collaboration, using his whole of government approach mantra. And so the 4 agencies that are central to this mental health initiative, our agency, the Office of the Secretary of Higher Education, Department of Human Services, our Department of Education, which is K-12, and the Department of Children and Families. The agency heads got together and in collaboration with the governor's office to try to remove some of those barriers and silos. We know that working with students, youth and students, K through 20, requires a more concentrated kind of effort that wouldn't allow a siloed approach to be effective. So the agency heads took it amongst ourselves to really try to remove some of those barriers. And so I think that, but the foundation for that was laid by the governor's office and the chief of staff and the chief policy advisor to make sure that we're meeting on a regular basis as a cabinet and that we get an opportunity to interact with each other and be fully aware of what the others are doing so that we can integrate our work in ways that could be complementary rather than adversarial.
Thank you so much, Mr. Secretary. I have one last question for you. So really appreciate it. You talked about a cohesive and long-term approach, and you also talked about how you used a data-driven approach, for example, about the Hope Center survey to guide some of the policy making. You also spoke about the technical assistance that's provided to campuses, and you travel a lot. You talk to students a lot, and you talk to folks serving our students on campuses a lot. My question is this: all these great things are happening, and new administrations come in, and the pendulum shifts back and forth, as you know. How what is some advice and recommendations you can give that these things, when implemented, can be sustainable? One says first part of the question, and the second part of the question is that what is the value in continuing to track impact, taking a data-driven approach, and how does that really play a role in this cohesive and long-term approach?
Great question. Well, one of the things that we think that helps us sustain this, of course, is having these initiatives codified in the law, which is why the Hunger-Free Campus Act in New Jersey has been so important, so that we can make sure that it is not just want to do or something that's nice to have, but it's actually on the books and legislation for us to have. Now, we acknowledge that we might not always have the funding that we would love to have to fully implement it, but the fact that it's actually on the books in law helps to allow us to fund it whenever we do have available funding. So that's a critical piece that we've been trying to be very mindful of pushing. And I think also the development of a state plan. I think our state plan is a good foundation that can help guide what the state's approach to higher education looks like for the next decade. And as we go to implement it, having those common threads that are related to equity, serving the most underserved students, helps to make sure that there is some kind of mantra that guides not just this secretary, but subsequent secretaries and governors as well. So I think as much as you can do to formalize any of this work, I think is ideal. It's one thing to get one-time funding to create a program. It's another thing to, if it's codified or if it's in law that you've done all the appropriate stakeholdering and gotten buy-in from. And even if it's not in law, the fact that you have a document that you've gained buy-in from legislators and other stakeholders in the higher ed community on, like a state plan, helps to make it tangible and real and something that people won't so easily walk away from.
Mr. Secretary, I just want to say thank you so much. This was great listening to you, listening to your vision, the strategic thinking, but not only, but also actionable items that New Jersey has taken. You and the governor and the state of New Jersey, collectively, the administration has been a role model for the rest of the country. So really appreciate you and your years of service in education, and really dedicating your life to the betterment of others and students. So just really appreciate you. Thank you so much for giving us the time to speak to our audience today across the country. I know you have a very, very busy schedule, so we really appreciate you giving us the time this morning. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. And if the audience, I know we can't see them, but if you can just do a virtual round of applause for Secretary Bridges, I really appreciate it.
But thank you, Atif. I appreciate the work that the Hope Center is doing, and will continue to do in the future. We need advocates like the Hope Center out there on the front lines, providing research as well as advocacy and information, as well as the convening power like this convening today to help continue to drive this work. So thank you all for your work, and thank you for having me, and look forward to continued collaboration in the future.